I've made it really clear from the time that I took on the job of Prime Minister that I want to make sure that New Zealanders who are working hard can get ahead. I think there is evidence that our tax system doesn't always incentivise hard work. The solutions to that, though, are more complicated, but the research out today suggests that there is some unfairness in our tax system.
So why aren't you doing anything about it?
We made some commitments in 2020 around what we would do in this term of government around tax and around the tax system, and I'm honouring those commitments. I think it's important that when you're looking at potential changes to the tax system that you have a mandate from the public for any changes that you want to make, and if we were going to make any changes, they would be outlined in our manifesto. We haven't put our manifesto for the coming election out there yet, but we will do that well ahead of the next election. Well, the election is on the 14th of October.
Prime Minister, you said in your first outlook that you thought that when the economy grew, that tide lifted all boats. Do you still think that after yesterday's talk?
If the government gets the policy settings right, around the policy and regulatory settings for the economy right, then a rising economic tide can lift all boats.
But our settings right now, and is the tide lifting all boats?
Well, people can form their own judgments on that. The research that was released yesterday provides an evidence base. Now, people can argue about the facts all that they like. Some people seem to be trying to come up with their own alternative sets of facts at the moment, but the facts are out there. Now, political parties can formulate their prescriptions or their solutions, and then we've got an election coming up in a few months' time where we'll be able to debate those issues.
Your Revenue Minister said that yesterday's reports will help shape tax policy and also describe the situation as a major breach of the principles of the tax system. What signal can you give that you might be prepared to look at that structural inequality past the image?
As I've indicated, we're not going to make further significant changes to the tax system in this term of government. We will honour the commitment we made in 2020. And before we head into the next election, which will be on the 14th of October, people will know what we're proposing to do. But I'm not going to speculate on those at the moment. We haven't actually written the tax policy for the next election yet.
You've got a minister saying there's a fundamental unfairness. Can you give any signal that you're willing to address that and equity past the October election?
What I have always said on the issue around tax and on the issue around people who are earning the majority of their living through their hard work, they're salary and wage earners, I want to make sure that the tax system is fair for them.
Well, it's not, is it? So what signal
Well,
can
I'm
you
not.
give
I'm not
about
going. Like I said,
I'm not asking for details, but your willingness to tackle it. Is it something that you will address in your election campaign when you go to work?
we will continue as a Labor Party and as a Labor government to work to ensure that the tax system and the economic system is a fair one for wage and salary earners.
Prime Minister, your budget actually resign rather than introduce a CGT. Will you do the same?
Like I've said, I'm not doing the rule in, rule out game, particularly not before we've set out what our manifesto for the next election is. What I will say, though, is that we'll honour the commitments we made in 2020 for this term of government. Before the next election, we will set out our tax policy for the next 3 years, should the Labor government be re-elected, and we will stick to that.
Prime Minister, capital gains or wealth tax?
What was that?
Do you rule out campaigning on a capital gains or wealth tax?
As I've said, I'm not announcing our tax policy for the next election today.
Prime Minister, do you think the government should be tightening fiscal policy, which is what you indicated in your speech, when the economy's gone into potentially recession?
At the moment, one of the biggest things that we need to focus on is making sure that we're bringing inflation back down. We can't sustain the high levels of spending that we had during the COVID-19 period. So we have been dialing back that COVID-19 spending. We're now in an area where we need to return to a more business as usual stance for the government, and that is what the government's focused on. Clearly the overall economic situation that we're facing at the moment has informed the budget decisions that we've taken.
What's rolling out a cyclone you would put too big an cost upon you in terms of finding better savings and also potential borrowing?
We've made our way through a series of natural disasters as a country in recent decades. And we have obviously looked at how the current pressure that we're facing stacks up against those, the Canterbury earthquake, the Kaikoura earthquake, and so on. I am confident that we can meet the rebuild requirements without the need for a specific levy or a tax to fund it.
So what are you going
Did
to...
you discuss a flood levy with Anthony? Is there any, because obviously the Australian model, is that something...
We had a meeting with the Queensland Recovery Authority where they mentioned it. They outlined how they had raised revenue to pay for the work that they had done. So yes, we considered, I didn't discuss it specifically with Anthony Albanese, but we did consider it. You know, the Minister of Finance and I are both on records of saying we got some advice on it, we considered it, and we satisfied ourselves that we could fund the work that's required without it.
So did your discussions with Australia help form this decision at all?
Now, we'd already taken that decision by the time I went to Australia, but the conversations that we had on Sunday afternoon were actually a lot more about how do you support, over a period of years, communities through what is no doubt going to be quite a significant undertaking. And so we can learn from the experiences of our Aussie neighbours when recovering from natural disasters. So that's what the meeting that I had on Sunday afternoon was
Just
about.
on tax changes, you said no major tax changes. That include trust tax?
I've indicated that we will honour the election manifesto that we put out in 2020. I'm not going to comment on any specifics ahead of the budget, but anything that we do in the budget will be consistent with the manifesto commitments we made in 2020.
So you said you're going to find the 4.5 billion within the current capital and operational plans. So then what are you going to cut to make sure you do it?
It's not. So it's about making sure that we're carefully prioritising the spending that we currently have, and the new spending allowances. We have new spending allowances. It's about making sure that we're prioritising how we spend those very carefully.
Is this latest version of
how
austerity coming
can
up?
you do that if you reallocate the funding to other things?
Well, we haven't. There's a new spending allowance in this year's budget, and you'll see how we spend it when we announce this year's budget.
Prime Minister, is this Labor's version of austerity, what we heard up there today?
No, absolutely not. Austerity means that you're not funding public services to keep up with increasing costs. We've made it a point in the time that we have been in government to make sure that our health system, our education system, the public services that New Zealanders rely on are funded to keep up with increasing costs. Now, people within those sectors will always be arguing for more. I think we've got the balance about right. Now, we have to recognise that we're coming through an inflationary period that is putting pressure on our public services. That will be also recognised in the budget.
Do you acknowledge, though, that you might have to cut some policies or projects under this no-frills rule just to stay within?
Well, we already have. So we've already done some significant reprioritisation in the time that I have been in government as Prime Minister, because I recognise you can't do everything all at once, and at the moment we do need to cut our cloth carefully, given the current economic conditions.
Do you think the government should
I'll let you finish.
You've got 100,000 migrants we're talking. Are you overcooking things?
That would be if it was annualised, so if the current rate of growth that we see at the moment on a month-on-month basis or in the last couple of months continues, then we could see that. So at the moment that's still hypothetical, but it does show that the work that we have been doing around immigration is making it easier for business and for the social service sector to get the skills into the country that they need.
So how much population growth can the economy handle? Can it handle 100,000 or?
Well, we have to be careful and we have to keep monitoring that, because we do know that the population grew quite quickly over the recent decade and a half, and that is one of the things that put pressure on our infrastructure, on our housing market and so on. We're catching up. There's been a house building boom in recent years. That doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet, though. So we've got to make sure that we get the balance right here. So we will be keeping it under constant review.
Do you have any other, apart from like your ongoing review of policy, do you have any more specific reprioritisation policies? Is that work finished?
So what you will see in the budget is further reprioritisation decisions that we have taken as part of the budget process. That happens every budget year, and you'll see that it certainly happened this year, that again allocates funding available to the most pressing of our priorities.
So with this I suppose, be the third tranche or another step, and would that be in areas that have already been flagged, or would they be quite new, undiscussed?
So the reprioritisation that I've been working through isn't just been about spending, it's also been about things like the legislative program, the regulatory program and so on. And so that most of that work has now been completed, as I indicated when I made my last announcement. But the last piece of that puzzle will be the budget. I foreshadowed that last time. And then reprioritisation will be an ongoing focus for the government, though. We have to make sure that, on a day-to-day basis, we're looking at making sure we've got our time, our energy and money allocated to the most pressing priorities.
Bernard's question, if you have to find money to fund site recovery, that is efficient.
That's right, and you'll see the decisions that we've taken around how we're doing that in the budget.
What is the scale of that?
It's going to be stepped out over many years. So we couldn't spend all of the money on day one, even if we wanted to. You've got to make sure that you've got the workers and the capacity to do these projects that are going to need to be done. And you'll see the first significant additional. We've already made some significant investments in this, but you'll see the next significant injection of funding for that in the budget.
Tension there. I mean, we talk about infrastructure, the need to invest in infrastructure, but some of those big ticket items are in transport. So, could you expect to see some transport projects which had been discussed, pushed out and delayed? And again, is that a tension with that stated goal of infrastructure?
I think one of the big tensions around infrastructure investment is making sure that we're being transparent about the longer term pipeline of work that's available in the infrastructure space. Firms, businesses will scale up. They will bring on stream the labour force required to do those projects if they've got some long-term certainty around what the pipeline of work is. And I think that is something that we haven't always done well as a country in recent times. It's something that we have been seeking to improve as a government. And you'll see some more steps towards that in the budget as well.
Do you think that the government should treat its finances just like a household's finances? That's what you're suggesting.
That's oversimplifying what I was saying. I think, Bernard, I do think we need to communicate the way we are making decisions in a way that New Zealanders will understand. That doesn't mean that I regard the government's finances as directly akin to a household's finances.
So you were going to take a no-frills approach because a lot of households were doing it tough. What about the 311 households who are worth $250 million each? Are they adopting the same no-frills?
Look, I know that you want me to get into a detailed debate on what we may or may not do around tax today. I'll repeat it again just in case you missed it. I'm not making announcements on what our election tax policy is today, but I am going to honour the 2020 commitments that we made for this term of government.
How should households who are doing it feel about those 311 households who are worth $250 million each paying half of the tax that they are and watching the government be restricted on its own spending because it wants to cut its costs?
I think all governments should always be responsible about the spending decisions that they take, and this government absolutely will be.
You spent the last few months being defined, I guess, by sort of bread and butter, no-frills decision making. Is that going to continue during the election and the public expect you to take any risks in your election campaign?
I'm not going to announce the election campaign policy here today, but there will be plenty in Labour's election manifesto for people to vote for.
Will we continue to hear about no-frills, bread and butter? Is that going to continue on?
You'll just have to wait and see what's in the campaign manifesto, but we'll be giving people plenty of reasons to vote for us. Jonathan?
Some public sector sites investment versus private sector R&D investment.
I think we need to do both. So it is a balance. If you look at the work that we've been doing around the R&D tax credit, for example, that is about stimulating private sector R&D investment. But there is a need for us to also make sure that we've got our public institutional settings right around R&D, and you'll see some more around that in the budget too. There's undoubtedly so. We want to make sure that our R&D spend, science spend, is increasing both in the public and in the private sectors.
What skills and the type of R&D you're looking to?
I think R&D that helps us to grow our economy is good. R&D that helps us to improve our quality of life and our way of life is also good.
Coming us up for a capital gains tax.
Nice way of continuing to answer the same question that I haven't answered yet, and I'm not going to answer it again.
Skills and training. You didn't mention Pukenga once during your speech. What is the benefit that we're getting out of it?
Well, I didn't mention it by name, but I certainly mentioned exactly what it is that we're asking Te Pukenga to do. So the establishment of Te Pukenga has been about bringing the on-the-job training and the off-the-job training together into a system that more seamlessly allows people to earn and learn at the same time. I think that that is one of the biggest changes that we could make in our vocational education system in order to ensure that we get the skilled workers on the job that we so desperately need.
Can you work any benefits actually?
Well, we have record numbers of apprentices at the moment, and the work that we've been doing around the vocational education system, including through the apprenticeship boost, is contributing to that, making sure that work that we're doing in on-job training docks seamlessly into the work and off-job training through to Pukenga, given that they now have responsibility for managing both parts of that system, I think is starting to deliver benefits for businesses.
Wouldn't it be a good idea then to go back to a fully funded situation? Because now you're Prime Minister.
Well, you'll just have to wait and see, Bernard.
Final question. Can you just explain to me what was the value of doing that report into the tax paid by the very wealthiest New Zealanders?
If you look at the research and analysis that government does across a range of areas on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't always lead to immediate decisions. Good, responsible governments build an evidence base for decision-making. That evidence base doesn't always point to one decision. It can point to a range of options and choices that governments have. The tax research does exactly that. Now, political parties in the campaign will be able to formulate their own solutions to the evidence base that's now out there. The Labour Party will certainly do that. Other parties can do that too.
Tax income thresholds fit for purpose in the current wage environment?
I think I do want to acknowledge that over time there will need to be adjustments to tax income thresholds as the overall incomes of New Zealanders rise. I'm not outlining any specific plan about that today, but I do acknowledge that in time there does, from time to time there does need to be adjustment to those thresholds.
People are going to take the 180 threshold away, but if you look at that sort of 70 threshold and it's going into one of the highest tax thresholds, I mean, is that really fair? Would you see
I'm certainly. Having played the not rule in and rule out game, I'm certainly not ruling out changes to income tax thresholds in the future, acknowledging that over time, periodically from time to time, governments do need to adjust that. But now is not the right time to do that when we have a high inflationary environment, because we know that tax changes like that put more money back into the economy can also lead to any additional value that people get through a tax being quickly eroded by inflation.
Just on housing infrastructure, in your speech, you talked about infrastructure spending in the budget. Will you be increasing or maintaining the housing infrastructure spending?
I'm not going to announce the budget today, Bernard. All right, I've got to get to the airport, but thank you, everybody.
Prime Minister, very quickly, sorry.
Yes.
Can you confirm that all New Zealanders registered in Sudan are actually out? And are you happy with that process of getting them out? Because they've pretty much been left to their own devices.
They haven't been. Our consular support that's being provided through other New Zealand embassy presence in the region has been working with our international partners to provide support to New Zealanders who are in Sudan. I don't have detailed breakdown of their movements, but the most recent update that I had about 24 hours ago suggested that so it is a very small number, that for almost all of them there was a plan in place.
Is everybody out safely?
As I've indicated, I haven't got I understand that there were plans in place, so that a lot of that involved working with our international partners, other countries who were bringing flights out, for example, but I haven't been able to account for the arrival of every individual yet. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Well,